Welcome to Chinatown Museum's educational program on collections. This is a series of talks about collectors and their fascinating sets of Filipiniana collections. Our past talks looked into numismatics, Philippine blades, and anting-anting. If you weren't able to catch these talks, do subscribe to our Museums Matter channel in YouTube. Hello, everyone. I'm Janine Gabato, your host for today. Thank you for making time to listen to John Silva's talk, especially on his personal journey as a collector. Our collections topic for today is titled The Crazy Obsession in Collecting Filipiniana Books. To start our talk, we would like to engage more with you by doing a poll. We would like to know if you are a collector or a bibliophile or a history enthusiast. There's going to be a number of choices down in your Facebook Live. Do please click the link so that we could be able to see the statistics. We will be sharing these with our speaker later on after his talk. To support our museum educational programs, since we've been closed for more than a year, we would like to ask for a donation and for support. This is our GCash link there. This live stream is supported by Ortigas Foundation, Bayanihan Collectors Club, Libreria Filipiniana, and High School Philippine History Movement. To start our talk, I would like to do an introduction of our speaker. John Silva is the Executive Director of Ortigas Library. Ortigas Library holds a specialized collection of Filipiniana books, maps, prints, documents, and memorabilia from the 17th century to the present. John was a former senior consultant to the National Museum of the Philippines. He is on the board of Synergia Foundation and the Manila Symphony Orchestra. John is also an author and contributor to local and international publications on history and culture. Please all welcome John Silva. Hi, sir.
Hello. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay. Uh, Hi, everyone. My talk is about an obsession with collecting Filipiniana. I became obsessed with Filipiniana books, in fact, all books, ever since I was a boy. My parents were were very important influencers. That's how they call them these days. My father was a military man who thought books, not toys, were good for me. So he took out subscriptions for to Popular Mechanics and Popular Science and Mechanics Illustrated, hoping I'd become an astronaut one day. One birthday present he gave me was a dictionary, and he expected me to, or commanded me to read it from cover to cover. I did, though I was a very unhappy birthday boy. But today, I can still remember many of the words, and if there are those that I had now have forgotten many years later, well, there's always dictionary.com or Google. My mother was oh, that's the dictionary. My mother was a bookworm. She was also reading daily newspapers. You know, in those days there were like three or four newspapers in the morning, magazines. Many of it was movie magazines and books. And there were times in the day when the door to her bedroom was locked, and I think it was because she didn't want to be bothered by children while she was reading. She got me subscriptions to Reader's Digest and the National Geographic. National Geographic, oh, this is all the newspapers that she reads. National Geographic introduced me to a world to explore. I developed a love for reading and more about those parts of the world. I think my desire to travel started with these National Geographic magazines, sort of a wanderlust, as Jose Rizal would call it. I was quite proud when the Philippines would be featured in the National Geographic, or was featured. In all the houses that we lived in Iloilo, I remember there was a little library in the office, and then in Baguio, there was also a section. There was always a library, and it was often just one wall of books, but it was enough to have a quiet place to read. In grade three, a classmate brought a book to school, and during recess, he'd make sure no one was around. And he'd open the book, and I was so surprised at the drawings inside. They were erotic shunga drawings with men and women in various sexual poses. We giggled and we were slightly disturbed, maybe excited. And these drawings were more interesting than the naked men and women in biology books that stood upright and just posing. I realized how a book can affect you. In this case, it was my first encounter with artistic pornography. In LaSalle Green Hills, our senior classrooms were in this most modern British brutalist architecture designed by Ines Rivera. Here we had English classes, which included book reading assignments. And my favorite of all books then and up to now is The Diary of Anne Frank. That impressed me. This young girl recounting her family life and her first love under very dangerous circumstances. And being Jewish, um, she had to go into the family had to go into hiding. They were later discovered, and Anne would die in a concentration camp just days before it was liberated. Her story made such an impact on me and, of course, the whole world. And I've always thought about her life, and it made me oppose all wars from then on. In high school, I joined the literary club and wrote for the journal and the school paper, which got me to read more. I made sure I was tagged then as a bookworm. And in keeping with appearances, I made sure I walked around carrying books and wore large round glasses just to give me that professorial air. The book that sent me off to collecting Filipiniana for the first time was Leon Wolfe's Little Brown Brother. Our history classes in high school didn't cover the Philippine American War very well. We were studying the American version of it, which went like this. There was a despotic general named Aguinaldo who was a nuisance to America's saving our country. Little Brown Brother revealed Filipino soldiers fighting under General Aguinaldo, liberating his country from both Spain and the United States. Finding out that hundreds of thousands of combatants and civilians fought and died for independence made me curious to know more about our hidden history. I started to buy Filipiniana books from the bookstores that were around in Manila, uh, Popular Bookstore for one. Now they're in Quezon City. And then there was La Solidaridad. And also there was Erawan. I was a member of a student organization called SDK. We thought of ourselves as the intellectual organization. Um, and so in SDK, we were introduced to all these readings of Marx and Lenin and Mao, who and also the Red Book I purchased in Hong Kong in a communist store many years ago. Recently, I was in Hong Kong and I found that that same store site, was now an Armani X store. My eclectic choice of books probably saved me from falling into the dogmatic mindset of the communists. Aside from Mao, there was James Baldwin, Gore Vidal, and Emma Goldman, and a host of other independent free thinkers who were radical in their own ways. I always liked Emma Goldman's quote, which is, if I can't dance to it, it's not my revolution." Because in those days, there were many, many communists and socialists who were sort of grim types. Emma Goldman was an anarchist. My I also had a rule for buying books in those days. Whatever was considered obscene and banned by the moral authorities, especially the Catholic Church, I immediately went out and bought them. In my library, there was Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence, um, Tropic of Cancer by Henry Miller, and Our Lady of the Flowers by Jean Genet, and many other books that got me many, many mortal sins and maybe even a threat of excommunication. When I was in the United States finishing my studies, there were Filipiniana material to be found everywhere for my collecting mania. When martial law was declared in 1972, there was a warrant for my arrest. You see, I had helped found and wrote for an anti-dictatorship newspaper called the Kalayaan, and was photographed demonstrating in front of the Philippine embassy. I couldn't go back to the country just yet, so I made myself useful by hunting for Filipiniana. Being in exile and knowing you couldn't go back made collecting anything Philippine even more personal and important to me. I lived in New York, the Center for Antiquarian Books in the United States. I'd enter these stores and ask, "Do you have anything on the Philippines?" More often, I was told that they had sold all their Philippine material to a Filipino buyer whose name was Eugenio Lopez. Eugenio Lopez, oh, this is the anti-newspaper, the anti-Marcos newspaper I wrote for. Eugenio Lopez was the industrial magnate who owned, among other things, the Manila Chronicle, ABS-CBN, and the Lopez Museum and Library, which was then a block from Rojas Boulevard. This modern like a ship about to slide into Manila Bay. I remember visiting it and researching there several times and enthralled by a photo album owned by the Rizal family. Being and holding it, this album made Rizal more human rather than the martyred saint we were raised to believe. I once found in a bookstore a large two-volume book called Our Islands and Their People. And I felt quite smug thinking I had just beaten Mr. Lopez to this two-volume book, only to find out that what I had purchased was very common. Thousands and thousands of this book were printed at the turn of the century, and there were still a lot running around or available. So I'm sure the Lopez Library already had them. Let's see. Oops. My partner and I, Jonathan Best, would go out to antiquarian bookstores, many of them outside the city, and they dotted the northeast states. And they were likely to have Filipiniana. My partner and I, on the weekends, would drive around and happily browse the whole day. We drove as far as Maine once, and I found so many books on Admiral Dewey, who sank the Spanish fleet in Manila Bay in 1898. You see, Dewey came from Maine. So the citizens of that state were proud of their victorious son and produced not just books, but all sorts of things from um, watches and clocks and cases, etc. Anything with the face of Admiral Dewey. There were also yearly county fairs throughout the country, and they would be sometimes several acres on fairgrounds, selling everything from used clothes to books, all laid out by sellers on portable tables beside their vans. There were also estate sales and garage sales, and the stuff sold were mostly household and old clothes. But sometimes the house had a library all carted out to the front of the house and sold for dimes and a quarter. And one time I lucked out and found a whole album of Philippine revolutionary stamps used on documents. I don't know how those stamps got to that house, but there they were, and now they're mine. From 1970 to 2010 was the height of my book collecting mania. The official historical accounts of the Philippine American War were plenty, and they were usually written by Europeans and American men, and it's all about the exploits and the fighting and the colonial administering. And after a while, all of that got repetitious and boring. I found more interesting the rare accounts of women who came to the country with their husbands and who did the colonizing. These women had to keep house uh, and feed their children, and all with the help of servants, cooks, houseboys, and the village folk. If they had children, they had yayas. And the women who wrote about their stay there made for more interesting reading. Unlike her husband, she was interacting with native Filipinos and had to secure their loyalty and service for the good and safety of her home. In like manner, American and Europeans who came to visit and explore the country, or came to teach, like the Thomasites, or just to be part of the islands, had more insightful views of native life. With collecting came a love for vintage photographs, which usually appeared first as illustrations in vintage books. I eventually purchased these photographs and had my first exhibition in 1987 at UC Berkeley, along with a catalog, and several years later, another one in a San Francisco gallery. In 2011, I published a book entitled A Token of Our Friendship, a study of the now disappeared studio photography and the posing of men revealing their friendship. Which leads me to an important point for fellow collectors to think about. Collecting to me is a jumping point into areas never broached before. The books bought were initially for my reading and enjoyment, but often I uncovered some facet of our history and culture that were written in passing, but now where decades later, even 100 years later, the facet actually carries an importance, a certain relevance to be explored and shared for the benefit of society today. A collection cannot be kept and added and not opened. Not using a collection is like, to me, hoarding and depriving society of a deeper knowledge of our past, of who we are, so that we know where we are going. A collector is also a different breed from an investor. Um, I don't, a collector usually will just sit on, I mean, an investor would only just sit on books like an investment and would think about selling it at a higher price later. I have no quarrel with investors, but again, an investor just will just wait for the time to sell. For example, I am downsizing my collection, selling much of the military war books, and I find that some of those books have appreciated in value because they just were in my library for over 30 years. That's a bonus, but I never thought of that when initially I bought them. And if they should sell well in auction, that's a boon. I've continued to make use of my collection, pick out the subjects that may interest the public, and develop essays and lectures around them. I recently, for example, studied the origin of the Philippinization of children's books and found that an African American, not a Filipino, started the whole process. In 1904, the newly appointed education superintendent, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, uh, l- noted that Filipino school children were not interested in American textbooks. He quickly realized that the illustrations in them had nothing to do with Filipino reality. He changed the pictures from American scenes to native ones, from maple trees to bamboo trees. The Carabaos, of course, still had peculiar nicknames, but they were better than than showing cows. Dr. Woodson's revisions worked. Children enjoyed reading their books, and there would soon be a demand for budding young illustrators like Fernando Amorsolo, and Pepe and Pilar became popular characters. And with an increase in English literacy in just a decade, it would now be thanks to Dr. Woodson and his Filipinized books. Dr. Woodson returned to the States and applying what he had learned and was responsible for instituting the African American History Month, which up to now still goes on every February, I think. His book, The Miseducation of the Negro, is a classic and standard college reading until today. I teach history to public school teachers for an education organization, Synergia, and found out most of our teachers couldn't identify or knew anything about Philip II. And yet, we were named after him. So, with book research and using the 16th century Ramusio map, the first to ever name an island Filipinas, I developed an essay and a lecture on the origins of our name. Filipinas was first used as a declaration of Spanish ownership, but centuries later, it would be used by us to define ourselves geographically and nationally. Another successful publishing was my book. Um, it was called Loving the Arts, which was to examine the basics of appreciation, but using Filipino works. Again, my collection of arts related books helped considerably. In effect, I used my collection to expand and enhance subjects not known or overlooked. And there are limitless topics to examine in Filipiniana in this and in future lifetimes. I started to slow down in my collecting. It had something to do with focusing on certain areas like women's writing in the Philippines, or architecture, or languages, which were less written about and harder to come by. The final straw that ended my collecting obsession, Filipiniana, is the current job I'm in. The Ortigas Library has a collection of over 24,000 books, maps, prints, photographs, and memorabilia, primarily Filipiniana. Attorney Rafael Ortigas amassed this collection from the 70s, picking up where Eugenio Lopez, who passed away in that decade, left off. I had met Mr. Ortigas several times before he passed, and he was intent on having a public library for his collection, just like Mr. Lopez. He collected, he said, because he wanted researchers to have access to as much Filipiniana as possible. Most importantly, he wanted researchers and writers to rewrite or expand conventional historical knowledge. He envisioned a new core of Filipino and non Filipino historians reclaiming history with a bias and empathy to Filipinos. And in close to the 10 years that we have been operating as a library, we have assisted authors, both international and local, the media, both international and local, embassies, and researching students. And again, we have no visiting charges. As a collector with a minuscule portion of the collection of that of Ortigas Library, minuscule meaning really, really, really insy wincy, you can very well imagine what came over me. I lost almost complete interest in collecting. What for? Here I was managing a collection beyond my wildest dreams. Every time I entered the library section, there was always guaranteed a book that I had never ever seen before. So, what was the use of collecting? I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. And if I made sure the library just ran and served the public, then it would be like sharing a collection, which I do. And in the end, collecting for some of us does end up as sharing. There are others who share their collection, and I want you to know them because they keep our history alive. Aside from the major libraries like the Lopez Museum and Library, the Filipinas Heritage Library, and various university libraries, there are private individuals who share their collection. I must cite Mario Fair, who allows researchers access to his collection. I also want to thank Melvin Lamb, who has allowed the library to study his collection and to share it with the public. He also was responsible for inviting me to be part of this Chinatown Museum series. Well, I'll end with the story of another collector. Dr. Jose Rizal collected books. He amassed a collection of 2,000 books, and this is a very rare book of his collection stored in Calamba, Laguna. From his collection and his research to the great libraries of Europe, he wrote and published his subversive books, his novels, his essays, and short stories, often with borrowed money, since his allowance from home wouldn't arrive on time. Rizal the Collector helped in transforming our society to be free. But as you and I know, today we are still bogged by serious problems needing to be addressed. So we will need more collectors than ever before. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir John. We have a few questions
All right.
from the team. And just to share, when you mentioned that you were already going in Ortigas Library and you were asking what for would you collect because the bulk of the Filipiniana collection is already in your workplace, right? But so our question is, um, it really is a perfect match for you being a bibliophile, and then you have this amount of Filipiniana books, which you've mentioned that every day you would find a book that you've never read. So the question is, how did they find you, or how did you find them?
Well, it was by this good connection was because my partner Jonathan Best
Mhm.
was a consultant to the making of the library. Um,
Alright.
before Mr. Ortigas passed away, he got Jonathan to sort of move the books from his home to this place called to our library. And after that, Jonathan suggested that I put in my resume to apply for the job as manager of the library, and I did. And I got the job mainly because they've seen what I've done with books, and that I collect books. I knew the books in and
Mhm.
out. I knew the Filipiniana books, so I certainly had I had a good chance at the position.
That's great. How many decades already, sir?
Oh well, this we're now going on the first 10 years of my job at Ortigas Library.
Mhm. And I understand that you've moved already to a new location, right?
Well, we are now in the process of moving. Our books are now in storage, temporary
Mm-hmm.
storage. We are going to be moving to Green Hills, which is going to be really great. We our library space, which is being constructed, is right above Unimart. It's larger to allow more books that will be coming in, or we will acquire, or will be donated to us. And what's nice is that it has these walkways to the Green Hill Shopping Center. I
Yeah.
envision this will be really great for various for more visitors to come.
Mm-hmm. We have a question here on what are your top three most prized Filipiniana books?
Oh my God! should have I should
Maybe
have
the
thought
most rare.
I should have thought about that question. Yeah, it's I've been looking at my collection in preparation for this talk, and I can't
Mhm.
say that there's like something that I really prized. There's one, the name escapes me, but it's all about a book on Filipino laborers going to Hawaii, and it's a book that teaches them how to write love letters to people back home, to get them to join them in Hawaii. And it's a book that is in English, Ilocano, and in Cebuano, and it has all these formulaic things like I love you because of, and it's all just to get women to join them working in the plantation in Hawaii. That I find
Yeah.
very interesting book. Anything on Rizal is great. I love that. um, and then, as I said, anything that has to do with something very different. For example, uh, a cookbook written by prisoners of war in Bilibid prison in the 40s, while they were imprisoned.
Mhm.
And what they did was that they imagined all the cakes and the stews and the hot dogs that they were deprived of, and they remembered their parents' recipes or their own recipes, and they wrote them all down, and then this all became a cookbook of the of the prisoners of Bilibid. That I find very interesting.
Interesting. So, there's a question here on what are your tips on how to care for the Filipiniana books?
Well, one is always to avoid light. The light, they should not be in sunlight, because that sort of makes them
Yeah.
fade. Always check every now and then. If you have a whole shelf, you have to sort of take them down for a bit and take a look, open the book, and make sure that there are no little insects or things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there are some very obsessive, and even our library, we put each book in plastic and seal them. Each book, so we're talking
Each book use.
20,000, yeah, 22,000 books, because of the fact that in this country, in our tropical country, there really are little insects. And
Mm-hmm.
so, better to, when somebody borrows our book, we take it down, and we take it out from the plastic, they get to read it, and then after that, it's put back in the plastic and then sealed again. It may be slightly laborious, but That's the only way to keep the books.
How often do you do this in a year, sir?
Which one? What do you what would what
Removing the book
Oh
from the
well,
plastic.
the thing is that there are all these people who come in and ask for the books, and so we make sure that we help them out. Some of the
Mhm.
rarer books, when they're taken out, we provide gloves, and we sometimes teach them how to open the book because the binding might be
Yeah.
fragile, and so and they
Mhm.
don't mind being taught, and they'll do it. So anytime it's open, the whole place is open, unless it's really very fragile and there are problems. That's why some of the more fragile books we are going to digitize and maybe just put in the for storage and no longer, if possible, no longer be open to the public.
Sir, someone is asking if Ortigas Library accepts donations.
Yes, we do. We do accept donations, and there are two types of donations. One is the general donations of used books. We take all used books. Why? Because we get all this requests from public schools and state colleges
Mm-mm.
throughout the country asking if we have those books. And so first we make sure that the books are equal to the grade level that is being asked for. We make sure that they're still in good condition, and then we ship them out. And we
Mm.
enjoy doing that because it really helps them. There have been several fires in school libraries, and so they're completely wiped out, or during a typhoon, and they need to restock their library. So we really like to help out in that
Yeah.
area. And the second area, of course, is anything that will help our Filipiniana collection. So most recently, we got a collection of Mrs. Trinidad Ligarda, a very famous woman, philanthropist, and civic leader, and also a former beauty
Mm-mm.
queen. And we have her letters and many articles, and so that adds to the understanding of Philippine history, and especially from a woman's point of view.
All right. We have a question here from John Paul Abellera. My father has old books and periodicals that are damaged. Can these be restored?
Depends on how bad the damage is. For example, if they've been, well, first we'd have to take a look at what does damage mean, because damage could mean they got wet, very wet, and uh, and then they weren't dried very well, so they're now sticking to each other. That's kind of difficult to repair. um, Books too, if they've been waterlogged, especially, or if there's been eaten up by insects. It's important for us to take a look at the documents and then be able to make an assessment.
But Ortigas Library also does conservation work, right?
Yes, we do. One of our most important areas of work is the conservation lab. That we help repair books, repair maps, prints. Now, in our expanded area, we'd like to go into art repair, works of art. Yes, we do, and it is one of our major income producers for the continuation of our library.
So all those who are watching, we will be sharing the contact information of Ortigas Library later on. We'll just proceed with a few more questions.
Okay.
Big Sala said, is it okay to put the old books inside the plastic, right? You were mentioning, but now he's asking if you could put mothballs in. Is this practice?
You don't put the mothballs in the plastic with the books. That might be a little overkill. What we usually do first is we get a whole bunch of old books,
Mm-mm.
um, a whole bunch, and then we put them in a box, and we put mothballs in them, and then we close the box, and they are in mothballs for about 2 weeks. and then when they're opened, we believe that there isn't any more critters affecting them, and so that's when they go into the uh, plastic cases.
So just to share, no, there are also, you also put silica gel, or you have humidity temperature control in the library. But for
Yes,
those who have Filipiniana collections at their homes, what could you suggest?
well, like try to find the coolest place in your house to make sure that that's where your library is.
Mhm.
If your bedroom has a lot of air conditioning, which it probably has, uh, best to have it there. Um, but in reality, uh, paper and books are um, are fragile in this tropical weather. You get so jealous of temperate climates where the books are in fairly good condition for many years, but in our society, in our hot climate, it is subjected to the vagaries of nature. So the best you can do is just make sure that they're in cool places and watch for any insects, and check the binding every now and then, and then when it needs to be repaired, bring them for conservation.
It's like a baby. You have to take care of
Yeah,
it.
I think that that's the other part of this whole. And not only do I don't want. I mean, not that I don't want. I'm negative about people who just conserve to hoard. I'm also negative about people to hoard to conserve, to hoard and then not to care for them, because
Yeah.
what you have to do is,
Mhm.
once you get a 19th century, 18th century book, you're really responsible, and you got to make sure that they're going to be around for several more centuries, since they've lived that long.
Yes, it is a lot of responsibility. We have a
Yeah.
question here on if you have any plans of digitizing the collection and sharing it to access with the public. Just to share, Sir John, we have a number of Philippine history teachers watching us.
Yes.
So I think that this question would most probably come from them, the
Okay.
collection and giving access to the public.
Oh, well, first, we would like them to visit the library. Um, to me,
Mhm.
it's still important to make a point of traveling to a library. When I was young, going to a library was a thing, was very important for me. Getting a library card was very important to me. So I like the
Mhm.
idea. I know maybe I'm old fashioned, so people should first go to the library. But barring that, since it's so difficult to
Mhm.
get to a library given the transportation problems, etc., then of course there's a question of getting us through internet. So in fact, we get all these internet requests like, do you have anything on Aguinaldo's birthday or something like that, or do you have a book on this that? So we do the research, and if it's just a couple of pages that they would like to know about, then we can scan it and send it back to them. We can't we don't we have not yet, although we have done a few digitization of some not too thick books, but that's not something that we do all the time.
All right. Um, in terms of the donation for the books, I'll be going back there because Alexi Malyari shared the question: how and where can we donate the old books?
You can donate them now by first getting to our website, which you will see, which you will post, no, and say, "I've got books to share." So we will tell you where, because right now we're in these temporary quarters in Ortigas, in Green
Mhm.
Hills, and we'll take them, we'll accept them, and then eventually they're going to go to our new site, no. So do get in touch with us first through our email, and then we do the connecting as to when you can drop them and things like that.
Thanks, sir. We will share that to everyone later on. Another question would be, how about page? This is for conservation. How about pages of books that are turning yellow in color? Is there something to be done about it? How to
um,
at least make the yellowing slower?
well, I don't think you can. I've seen my own books turn yellowing, and that's sort of like an age thing. Just like I'm growing white hairs now, uh, so that's one. But second, you need to, if the coloring is getting is let's see, bothering the type and the text and the photographs, then maybe you should really bring it bring it to our attention. First, you take a picture of it, you send it to us, and you say, "Look, this is what's happening. What do you think it is?" And we can give you some sort of free advice. And if you really, really, really want that book to be taken care of, we can suggest things that we might be able to do, and negotiate from there. But I think you just have to accept that yellowing is going to be part of the aging process.
Hmm. Another question. For researchers interested with Filipiniana collections, you gave a list a while ago on the libraries where they could go to. Could you
Yes.
please just enumerate it again?
Okay, there are certainly the libraries that, first of all, the National Library, which I didn't
Mhm.
mention, should be gone to because it's incredible library. They have a large Filipiniana section. You need certain documents, or you need a letter maybe, because you're going to go into a very important section of the library. That's where even the various works of Rizal are there too. The National Library, and then of course the private libraries like uh, the Lopez Museum and Library, the which right now is still in the process of establishing reestablishing itself because it also moved quarters. There's the Filipinas Heritage Library. Um, then there's the university libraries like the Ateneo Library. There's the American Collection at the Rizal Library in Ateneo.
Yes,
There's University of Santo Tomas Library. Um, so I think that's it. And then, but that's more than enough. And then
that's
of
true.
course our
That's
library.
already a lot.
Yeah,
Actually, I've been to most of this except for the National Library. Every time I go there, it's the government is doing something with it. We have last two questions
okay.
is on this is on book. So with the termites. This is one of the reasons I think that you have to really move the books, right?
Yeah, take a look and see things moving around. Um, you cannot even you see my library in the back. Every 3 or 4 months, I make sure that I just sort of take a whole bunch and look
Move
at
it
it.
around.
Yeah, and look at the shelf. You just have to, or else there's all these hidden little invaders that are doing their thing without your knowledge.
We have a question here from Rafael Gabriel. He was asking if the Ortigas Library has any initiatives in terms of public education on the importance of book collecting.
Um, I, for one, have made it a point of going around the country, and especially with Synergia, doing lectures to public school teachers and to teachers in general and educators on the importance of books, on the importance of libraries, and on whatever topic related to a library or books. I am more than happy to prepare such a lecture. So this person can get in touch with me and say, we're going to do uh, a fair, or we want to do a symposium. Could you prepare a blah blah talk on this sort of thing on books? I'd be more than happy to do it. That's part of our outreach program, and we don't. I don't necessarily have to even fly anymore there. It can be another Zoom thing, but I'd be more than happy to do that because it is really part of our efforts.
Mm-mm. So thank you, Sir John, for sharing with us your time and most especially your story. It was like looking in your diary and seeing how you were able to get into Filipiniana collection. We hope a lot of the viewers right now are also encouraged to share their collection story. And if not, if you're not collectors yet, do get into collecting. It will be most rewarding if you're able to share your collection story with us.
Good.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for everybody for attending, whoever you are there.
Just to share, who are our viewers? A lot of those viewers are 65% history enthusiasts. This would most probably be the teachers, the history educators. We have 14% bibliophiles and 21% collectors. So most probably coming from the Bayanihan Collectors Club. Thank you
Yeah.
everyone for watching.
Thank you.
This is the crazy obsession in collecting Filipiniana books. If you were not able to catch the first part, we will be posting this in our YouTube channel. So there. If you were inspired by John Silva's talk and you also would like to share your collection, please email us at chinatownmuseum@gmail.com. We have it right here. So thank you also to John Silva, Melvin Lam, Bayanihan Collectors Club, Advocates of Heritage Preservation, Libreria Filipiniana, and the High School Philippine History Movement. To share, we have our YouTube channel called Museums Matter, and we also have right now it's going to be 4 topics for collections. We have numismatics, the Philippine coins, Philippine blades, and anting-anting just last week. And now we also have Filipiniana books. If you have collections that you would like to share with us and also your story, do message us at chinatownmuseumph@gmail.com. We are also sharing here Ortigas Foundation's Facebook page at the same time. It's ortigas.foundation. And their email is ortigasfoundation@ortigas.com.ph. We are also sharing our contact information for Chinatown Museum. It's chinatownmuseumph@gmail.com. Thank you, everyone. Happy weekend.